emergency. I'd just like to point out the picture of Dustin here. It was great times had in Vegas. On our way to Arizona. But Dustin Renz, he is a coach too. He's also a skydive school instructor, amongst other ratings he has, and he is going to walk through emergencies with us.
All right, share the screen. I was really excited in Vegas that you have a cigar inside of a building.
And Dustin, I will message you if the audio goes weird.
All right, cool. Can you hear me okay though?
Right now I can, yes.
All right, so I'm covering emergencies. I didn't really get to see ahead of time exactly what everybody was going to cover. So luckily enough, a lot of the points that I have were already covered. So I'm not going to spend too much time on beating those to death. But if you just look at kind of the common theme among all the issues, the majority is complacency. So that's the big killer in our sport. So skydiving requires your full attention at all times. So as you're going to see, we're going to go through a few different things, and at the end, I'm going to tie it up with some points that just like observations and kind of common themes that I've seen over the last couple of years that are somewhat common issues, we'll say. So I did this presentation up a few days ago, and I actually came across the Dan BC safety day video. So I really loved what he had to say. So I kind of stole a couple points from him from the first two slides. But basically, he had broken down all skydiving emergencies into two big categories, which is being ready and being aware. So I encourage everyone to watch that afterwards. It's got some great information. I can't show it to you because it's like 20 minutes long, but take a look over it and you get a chance. So not to go over too much of what other people had to say, but ask yourself before you even go for a skydive, are you ready? Do you have, look at your personal conditions. Are you sick, hungover? Are you uncurrent? Your skill level. Consider your jump difficulty. If it's your first sit fly and you're going with like a 6-way, it's probably a very dangerous situation. It's always good to challenge yourself, but don't push the limit too hard. Take it small pieces at a time. You should be learning on every jump, but don't overkill it, because then you're no longer learning. Your skydive turns to crap. Next thing, weather conditions. Sometimes there's days that people are on the fence about the weather. There's no shame in sitting out a skydive. I do it all the time, even when less experienced people decide to go. Be sure of the weather, and remember that, depending on your drop zone, weather can change by the time you get to the to the plane, by the time you climb. So consider those things. If the weather turns out of your limit, then don't skydive. I got jump difficulty twice on there. So we already gone through gear checks. The gear checks are extremely important, especially your handles on the way out of the plane. I think I talk about this a little bit later too, but the last thing you should be doing on the way out of the plane is checking your handles. I've seen it happen a few times in the last couple of years where people are bumping their pilot chutes, and it's terrifying, right? So the very last thing you should be doing is making sure that your pilot chute handle is not poked in or falling out or anything. So the next Dan BC point was awareness. So you need to be aware by keeping calm. A little bit of stress is always a good thing, keep you on your toes. But when it goes too far in either direction, then it becomes a problem. So if something's too stressful, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. But alternatively, if you're completely complacent, you haven't even thought too much about the jump, you're just going to go for it, that's a problem also, right? the more you do something, the more you get comfortable at it, the easier it is to become complacent. So just don't fall into that trap, and stay calm and know what you're doing. So be calm during break off. That's not the end of the skydive. You need to pay attention to people that's around you. Expect people to be tracking close to you. Be prepared to avoid them and respond if they open right beside you, and adjust your track as you need. Also, know what the other groups are doing. So you can consider, like Pete mentioned earlier about tracking into other groups. That's obviously a consideration during a break off. Be calm at pull time. Like I said, assume you're going to be close to somebody. You should have your hands on your risers. Be prepared to avoid hitting them, and pull at your altitude. And don't sacrifice stability or altitude for stability, right? When it's your time to pull, your time to pull. Sorry, the dog had surgery. So prepare to conduct your EPs when you open your canopy. You should already know what you're doing in any given situation. The time to try to decide how to respond to your EPs or change your EPs is not the sky. You should have planned for various situations already. So practice on the ground, so that when you're up in the sky, it becomes a little more streamlined if anything goes wrong. Under canopy, I know Tom talked a little bit about it already, but pay attention to people around you. Don't get tunnel vision. It's easier. It's easy to get focused on your target, and more tunnel vision the closer you get to the ground. But really, you should be paying more attention to people around you the closer you are to the drop zone, right? It's when people are entering patterns, sort of thing. So pay attention to others. Even on your final, you should be keeping your eye out for others. Seen in that one of those pictures that Tom put up of people I don't know. So we'll talk a little bit about some malfunctions. Obviously, is not to replace actual practice of EPs. It's just to kind of refamiliarize yourself and get your brain thinking about malfunctions. We often just consider high and low speed malfunctions, but as we've talked about, there's a number of other situations like obstacle avoidance, ground hazards, those sort of things that you also need to think about, not just your canopy function. In any high-low speed malfunction type situation, we've all heard assess, think, react. So assess the situation, take a deep breath, decide on whether or not to keep the main or use the reserve, and react if you need to by executing your emergency procedures. One thing I like to teach in the ground course is, rather than super focusing on the different types of malfunctions, is just to recognize some commonalities between the high and low speed malfunctions. In a high speed malfunction, canopy small, you're still very windy, or probably still belly to earth, those sort of things. Or at a low speed malfunction, a little bit more time to react. I'm not going to talk too much about canopy collisions because I know Ben has a whole other presentation on canopy collisions right after me. But I thought my audio was going again. Yeah, so obviously canopy collisions, avoidance is the most important factor of it. Be prepared to react, hands on your risers, those sort of things. You don't go through somebody else's, right, or hit somebody. So I felt like this needed a little bit more time to focus on some 2-out scenarios. So we see on the left, we have a biplane, and on the right, there's a side-by-side. So really, these two, both these 2-out scenarios, they can be landed successfully, and there's a consideration needs to be made that there is a significant risk of entanglement if they're cut out, if you're cutting away your main 2-out. Obviously, if they're not performing nicely like in those pictures, that's the time to consider cutting it away. But regardless, if they're behaving kind of nicely, you can land it. Don't pop your toggles. Gently steer the canopy, the main one that's above your head, to the ground, and be prepared to PLF. In a downplane situation, a little picture of a Skyhawk's downplane. Well, that could happen potentially to a 2-out scenario. That is definitely a time to cut it away because you're just curling towards the ground. Yeah. So some other situations that we've already discussed a little bit. Hazards near the ground. It's easy to get target fixation. So the time to avoid it is, 3,000 feet in the air, not on your 20 feet away from smucking a tree. So be familiar with all the hazards. And I forget who talked about it, right? Well, Tom, but if you're going to hit something, you need to flare ahead of time. If you're going to hit like a tree, that sort of thing, try to slow yourself down, grab branches. That's obviously if it's completely unavoidable. Off landing. So it's important to be very familiar with your outs, and not just where there's outs, but the hazards associated with the outs. So like, for example, at SVI, I know that the out across from the highway has power lines going through it. The kind of clear area by the Rocking Horse pub that has a bunch of fences that you can't really see. So it's important to know those things and have them in your back pocket if crap hits the fan, that you're more prepared to respond to those sorts of situations. And of course, we have an empty beer fridge situation. I'm joking. I don't like beer. All right. So a lot of what we talked about today is about how to mitigate some of the risks of skydiving. Big one is physically practice regularly. There's a reason why we get down on the creepers and try to go through things in that type of way, because it's going to make you respond better when you actually get on your skydive. So practice regularly. Also important to understand that under stress you act differently than you might on the ground. So you can try to, in your practice, induce some of that stress a little bit. And that's why we try to simulate real conditions as best as possible. Things like training aids, practice harnesses, those things help simulate real conditions. It's not going to be a quiet, calm, high-speed malfunction, right? So try to simulate real conditions as much as possible. Obviously, there's a limitation to what you can do on the ground, but instructors are your resource for EPs. The drop zone, especially if you're a novice, reach out to the instructors. We're more than happy to go through EPs with you. By all means, you should be doing it, not just when you're getting a COP, but you should be doing it all the time, right? So on other point here, so don't create training scars, bad habits, and don't do something in your training that you wouldn't do in real life. You should try to Practice it as if it was happening in real time. And bad Cessna habits. So it happens all the time where people think they're the only ones in the sky, and perhaps they are because they're at a Cessna drop zone and they cut across the field, not staying in their lanes and that sort of thing. But when you have your A, you are certified to jump at any drop zone in Canada or the US. So consider that you might be on a Twin Otter type drop zone and jump as if you were, jumping at one of those places. And I'm not going to beat that one to death, but check your gear, handles check on the way out of the plane. So next couple slides is kind of the general points / lessons learned, observations from the last couple years of different things that has kind of come up. We kind of talked about this already, but situational awareness is huge. Pay attention at all times in the skydive, whether it's be on the plane, pre-boarding gear, any of that, you should be paying attention. Like napping on the plane, why would you waste some of your skydive napping? You paid good money to be up in that plane. Go through the stuff in your head. Be aware of where you're flying, right? Because if something were to happen to the plane, for example, where there's mountains everywhere at SVI, and you might not be at the altitude you think you are. So pay attention. Pay attention to your altitude. Goes without saying, really, that altitude awareness is extremely critical in skydiving. So don't sacrifice altitude for stability. Your pull time is your pull time. Talked about that already. So utilize all your time on every jump. The jump's not over when the canopy's open. You should be running through different scenarios in your head. Oh, what if I'm going to hit that tree? Or what if I'm over there? So that's great times to be, training your brain to deal with potential future situations. Cell phone might be worth consider having in your pocket in case you land off. Allison would appreciate a phone call. Remember cameras. So it is a requirement that you're not allowed to have a camera until you have 200 skydives, and it's for a good reason. Cameras are distracting. They could be potentially snag hazards when you're not even fully comfortable with skydiving yet. That also includes taking your cell phones out and doing selfie videos and that sort of thing. If you're paying attention to your cell phone, you're not paying attention to sky around you, and that's a really bad habit to get into. So respect the sport. What I mean by that is everybody needs to have an appreciation that skydiving is a dangerous sport and is not without risk. Don't do stupid stuff to try and impress your friends. So trust your training and follow it. So I've had a couple malfunctions, and by that point, I'd already committed everything to muscle memory, and it kind of happened so quickly that it's nice to be confident in your training, because that's what's going to get you out of a sticky situation. Like I spoke about earlier, you should be getting comfortable with the different scenarios on the ground. In the sky is not the time to alter your emergency procedures, which leads me to the next point. Canopies are replaceable. If you're thinking in a malfunction situation about the cost of your canopy, that is not a good way to train your mind. If that leads to you not cutting away a bag lock, for example, or a bad canopy. Canopies are replaceable. What insurance is for. Go buy another one. It's not worth life. I'm going to beat this one to death, but practice your friggin' EPs. Utilize some of the practice equipment at the drop zone. If your drop zone has hanging harnesses, use those. Practice vests, all those things are great. I try to simulate real conditions as much as possible. But when I have the students, I'll grab on and shake it and try to simulate a little bit of kind of the overwhelming nature that an emergency kind of gives to you. So plan your jump and jump your plan. If you're changing stuff halfway through, the plane, it's not a good time to be doing it. It's hard to communicate in the plane. I can't hear crap in the plane, and sometimes I just smile and nod at Ashley that I know what she's talking about, but I really don't. Make sure everyone on the load, if you, for whatever reason, need to change stuff, everybody needs to know what you're doing. Particularly for the novices, I've seen a lot of people the last couple of years change some things without letting anybody know. And it's important to understand that changing things has consequences that you might not even think. That leads me to the next point. So trying new things, that's great that novices want to try new things, and that's how you learn in the sport. But you need to talk to somebody before you do it. At least talk to Manifest, have it cleared what your plan is, and then don't deviate from your plan. So one good example I can think of is we had an individual that decided that, okay, it was a solo jumper that was going to practice, just flying stable, and has decided to throw in tracking into that equation to practice tracking, because they had done one coach 2 jump that involved a little bit of discussion on tracking. And next thing you know, there's people are tracking to other groups and opening very closely. So I did witness a kind of a close call where that particular situation happened. So, and of course the novice had no idea that was even really a risk, because it wasn't even a thought, right? So it's important to clear your plans with somebody if you're new to it, and then jump your plan. Landing patterns, Tom already talked about that one, but jump as if you're at a big drop zone. Our drop zone only has 2 landing patterns in the student field and 3 in the other field, but that's it. There's no other special made up pattern just because you feel like you're the only one in the sky and assessing the drop zone. Currency kind of falls into the whole complacency discussion, so you want to stay current as best you can. It's obviously hard in the winter in Canada, so do things to try to keep your mind, thinking about skydiving, safety days, those sort of things. Squeeze a trip in down south in the winter, whatever. Currency will be extremely helpful. When you come back to the sport, don't, April 15th, start off your first jump of the season with like a 20 way when you haven't jumped in 6 months. So be humble. We like to razz each other, and that's fine because I'm probably the worst culprit for it. But learn from others and let others learn from you. Tom had a great bunch of pictures and slides. Those are things that are extremely helpful. As much as we like to give each other a hard time about beer and whatnot, those are really good opportunities to learn. And I'm in the military. We do after action reviews of everything. So look at what went right, what went wrong, how can we prevent something from happening in the future. So when you're done razzing your friends, have an actual discussion with them, and try to learn from those things, because who knows, it could be in one of those situations at some point. And I put this one in for Allison, but aims are actually a really good tool, and I'm sure she's going to talk about a few common incidents that came out in the annual aim summaries, but those are great to read through. If you take the time to read through it, you can see some common themes, and that will better prepare you as a skydiver of what sort of things that you want to address. And then, of course, the aim reports, I'm sure we'll also talk about. If there's an accident, incident, function, you want to complete an aim report, which kind of identifies, it's almost like an after action review, the causes and that sort of thing. Allison speak to that a little bit more. And lead by example. So encourage a safety mindset. If you're an experienced person, Remember that the novices are looking for you. Whether or not you're a coach doesn't matter. I remember when I think I was just getting my solo, or maybe pre-solo, but there was another guy on the plane that had like 20-something jumps, and I saw him checking his gear, like, well, this guy's like the cream of the crop with his 25 jumps. But those are things that stick out in people's minds, that they see you taking the time to check your gear before you get on the plane. Well, they're going to do it rather than just telling them to do something. Do it yourself, lead by example. So there's kind of three big takeaways from a safety emergency kind of mindset that I took out from everything. Number one is that everybody has a role in safety at the drop zone. That includes your safety and other people's safety. So remember that there's no shame in setting out a jump that you're not comfortable in making. And it's an obligation of yours to not participate in a jump that is outside your limit. Things change in the middle of a flight. There's no shame in landing with the plane. And don't just be pushed because you see someone else doing something. That's not a good reason to go for a skydive. If you see something that you feel is unsafe, you should bring it to the attention of somebody. If you see something weird on someone else's gear, let the person know. It's all plays a part in encouraging atmospheres of safety. And the newer generations of skydivers will learn from it and hopefully also encourage a safety atmosphere. 2, the most dangerous thing in skydiving is complacency. Pretty much I'll say the majority of skydiving incidents occur because someone is being complacent at some point. And a big one from Dan BC that I really liked is expect everything that can go wrong in a jump to go wrong. He gives a good example of if you expect that you're going to have a hard pull, well, you're probably going to pull your pilot chute handle as if it was a hard pull. So anticipate those things and be prepared. That goes hand in hand with the complacency. So that's kind of it for me, but I put some resources up to review. Some good stuff about emergencies, EPs, PIM 2A. I know a lot of the novices, depending on where you learn, I've seen people not familiar with the PIMs, so definitely look at what they are. There's a great document called the Sport Canopy Endorsement. I think it's called the Reference Manual or something like that, but it's also available on the CSPA website. Lots of good canopy information on there. Remember, instructors are resources for any emergency procedures. There's another link there. If you just Google 25 ways to become a better canopy pilot, there's a lot of good information. I'd read through it every so often. There's Australia Parachute Federation videos that are on YouTube as well. They're great. Film in our student program. And take the time to look up the Dan BC safety video. It's about 20 minutes long, but it's definitely worth it. That's it for my presentation. Let me see if I can get back.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dustin. I might need you to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, got it.
Yay. Awesome. Do